Hi, I'm Dr. Mike and this is NFGeeks. Well, this video is another Ask Dr. Mike video on the NFGeeks Facebook forum. On Sundays, members post questions for me to answer in a video, and whatever question gets the most likes wins. And this video response to answer an Ask Dr. Mike question is for Adrian Andrade. He won. Here's his question, okay, and he's an INTJ. And his question is, how can you speed read someone's temperament on the basis of their body language and speaking style? Are there questions that can be asked to narrow down their temperament? More importantly, how can a person tell if a person they just met is an intuitive or a sensor? All right, that's a good question. I had a very interesting process through thinking this question through because it was very hard for me, believe it or not. And I'll explain why. But it's been very hard because I actually went through 3 or 4 videos of trying to answer this, and some of them were better than others, and I didn't like it, and it was a real struggle. So this video is really to talk about the struggle of that and then try to get to answering the question because I think the process of the struggle that I had is relevant to what the answer may be. But it was a real struggle. Okay, you'd think it would be very easy because this is a straightforward question, but it was fascinating. And this is why I like these Ask Dr. Mike videos and these questions, because the answer may be very different than what the question wanted or the person wanted, but it brings out other things that haven't been thought about before. At least in me, it brings out things that I hadn't thought about or was able to do or had in my head or anything like that. So that kind of stuff is very, very interesting, and I do think it should be in the answer, and it's going to be in the answer of this one. Okay, so let me take you through the process of the difficulty that I had. So my first reaction was sort of be critical, because I don't like the speed reading techniques that are floating around about personality type, particularly ones that are just picking up cues and things like that. I don't find that they're accurate. I think they're a hit and a miss. There's nothing new there from me. I mean, this is the position I've held, since day one, so nobody's shocked by that. I also believe that there needs to be a more standard, formal inventory like the MBTI or something better, if that ever comes out. That should be used because that makes the whole thing more legitimate. That's also known. Nothing new there. But I realized that this question was coming out of a request for help. It wasn't coming out of that theoretical, isn't this way a better theoretical model than some other theoretical model, It wasn't asking that. It was asking, what do I do in the moment? I'm in a party, I got to get to the Doritos, how do I socially navigate this, And especially from an INTJ, that could be a real conundrum sometimes, or any of the introverted types, but certainly INTJ, it's sort of notorious for that having or being a problem for them. When I look at the meme, socially awkward penguin, there's a part of me in my head that always says, oh, poor INTJ. I always associate that with an INTJ, which is kind of funny. So it's a legitimate question to ask because it's a request for help, And I started thinking like, okay, well then I should answer this in a way that's actually helpful to Adrian and other INTJs. And it occurred to me that, I do this. I do sort of type people on site when I'm going around the world here, in my world anyway. And it's mostly done for fun. Like, it's not done like I need to really know this to interact, because I sort of just naturally know how to do it. And I guess I think I'm just naturally acting in a way that's type specific, but I do sort of do this all day. But again, it's more fun, like sitting in a restaurant and just looking around, or even other people in cars, like, oh, look at that SP. Driving there, a lot of different things. So I'm always doing that. So I thought, okay, well, if I'm always doing it, then, I think I can answer this question. Now, here's where the problem comes in. The problem comes in that I had a hard time trying to figure out how to answer this question because I realized that I was really having difficulty translating my NF process into an NT language. Okay, because I started thinking about, well, what is it that I do and how do I do it? And it became very hard, and I don't know that 100% of it is going to be translated in this video. I'm not even sure if like 70% is going to come out right. It was really, really hard. And it was hard in two ways. The first way, what I realized is that what's happening with me is a very sort of holistic, in the moment, non-rational experience, okay, of typing somebody. And in order to translate that into NT, I have to turn it into a rational process that makes sense in a logical way, okay? That is a little more linear. I mean, not simplistic, but linear in terms of its explanation and its execution. So something that's holistic, happening in the moment, has to be reduced into parts that can be explained in a rational way. Now, I realize that's possible, but I found it very hard for me to do because I'm not experiencing it in this rational way, okay? That's not my experience at all. So, for example, what do I mean by that? So first of all, when I'm typing somebody, just sort of having fun, it's happening immediately in the moment. I'm not having a thought process where I'm thinking through what this person's type is, and I'm like, okay, this, that, and they have this, and they say that, and boop, 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 boop. I don't go down this list. It just sort of happens in the moment, like, oh, look, an SP. Like, literally, it comes out like that, all right? And it's happening all at once. I mean, obviously there's parts in terms of what I am seeing, but I'm not seeing the individual parts and putting them together. I'm having a totally holistic moment because I'm seeing all the parts at once immediately, okay? So there's that. And then on top of that, it's totally emotional and subjective. I'm in a more emotional, non-rational, empathic place with the person as it's going on, sort of walking in their shoes as they walk in their shoes. And this language is the next part. I'm having that moment, and it's not rational at all. So it was very hard to sort of think this through here with that experience and turn it into something NTs can listen to. And what made it harder, and here's the second part, what made it harder is I was trying to think of how to explain these things, and I kept falling into metaphors, okay? Which I know is like, obviously NFy, but I wasn't trying to be NF, I was trying to be NT and speak the NT language, and I kept like getting stuck in a metaphor that I understood and other NFs would understood, but like an NT would think it's bonkers, and rightfully so. From an NT process and an NT perspective, it is kind of bonkers. So, I had to keep correcting myself. So I was thinking in my mind, I was thinking like, okay, well, I have to sort of, really type somebody, you sort of got to get behind their eyes and just like, okay, behind their eyes. How am I going to explain that, to an NT, and like, well, how do you know they're an INFP? Well, they have that shine, that an INFP, shine. I'm going to explain shine. How am I going to explain shine? It's like explaining the auras. I mean, how am I going to explain that? So there was a bunch of things that go on in my mind that explain the experience, but I couldn't wrap into a rational language. Or I could wrap it a little bit, but something is missing. So it's kind of interesting epistemologically and in terms of language that when we translate things from one thing to another, even between type, something is lost. But then again, something new is gained because of the different interpretation that the other side's going to have, too. So my experience of it is trying to explain something and then something getting lost in the translation and sounding goofy. That's the problem I had as an NF. So, but I'll try to manage my way through this, okay? And again, the reason for this is that there's some kind of serious, at least with me as an ENFP, there's some serious empathic stuff that's going on, and that's why. Part of typing is to sort of walk in someone's shoes as they're walking in their shoes. So here we go. Walking in their shoes as they're walking in their shoes while you are watching them in your own shoes at the same time. You know what I mean? There's some sort of emotional thing going on where you're with them and in them, and that allows for the typing to take place from an NF point of view. That's not very helpful to an INTJ or any of the NTs. So I'm going to have to sort of break it into pieces that an NT can use, in their own system. And that has been easy. So let's get into it then. What kind of things then can I say? So I decided that the best thing I could do, because I may be screwing up with these metaphors or not translating them in a way that's useful or whatever, that I should at least try to give an INTJ a frame, to work with prior to the social event. Okay, so that if they enter a social situation of some kind, they're coming in with a certain tool or a certain type of analytical tool, I should say, like a telescope or a microscope or electron microscope or whatever. The microwave, microscope, for the background radiation, whatever it is. Use whatever metaphor, technology metaphor. But they're coming in with something right from go that can be useful. All right. So the first thing I really want to do is frame the mindset in a way that an INTJ can use and grasp and connect with. Okay, so what I want to start off with is what strengths and weaknesses should the INTJ be aware of as they're going in, prior to going into the door, of the party. So there's a party going on, they're going into the door, and I realize an INTJ at a party, maybe that happens, maybe that doesn't, but let's assume it is, let's be positive. So they're going into a party, how should they, what kind of frame should they be going in on? So let's start with strengths and weaknesses. The first one is that they should look at the whole social situation as a game, like game theory, okay, or just strategically. In a problem-solving sense, not in a manipulative sociopath sense, because that's what it's always interpreted as with the INTJ, and I think that's a misinterpretation. But I think what they should do is think about it in terms of a strategy and problem solving. So here's this problem: how do I navigate my way to the Doritos, in the party from a dispassionate, objective place? Okay. Now I say that because that's the INTJ's strength. Okay. If they view this as problem solving, then I think the INTJ will be able to handle this much better than they normally would. And I think that's because an INTJ, without doing this, and maybe not even realizing it, they're going into social situations from the memory of social anxiety. Okay, of having awkward things happen in parties or places, and having bad things take place where they feel alienated, or they actually do get alienated, and that starts their paranoia going and all of that. So they're coming in from a place sort of expecting doom, all right, and anxiety connected to that. So instead of that frame, okay, going with the frame that this is a strategy, like a game of some kind, a complex game, and or just a complex problem that needs solving, and you're stepping back from a dispassionate, objective point of view in order to handle that situation. Honestly, INTJs, you do that in all sorts of other things, and it works out just fine. So I don't think there's anything wrong with taking that strategy and applying it to the social situation. But you got to sort of consciously decide that prior to going in. Okay, you have to sort of, frame it already, and then with that frame go in. Otherwise, all the negative stuff is going to be guiding you. Okay. The second thing is, and I'm kind of putting them together, is to be direct and decisive. Even though it's two things, and I say that because that's that's a strength of INTJ. So what do I mean by that is that INTJs make direct statements and ask direct questions, and it's not loosey-goosey, it's not vague, it's not passive-aggressive. It's pretty straightforward. Okay, and I think you can use that to your advantage in terms of questions. So be direct. So when because one of the things is asking questions to figure out type in order to navigate this. Ask questions, and ask direct questions. Okay, don't be loosey goosey, indirect about it. Say it, ask it straight up. All right, keep them simple. One syllable questions. I mean, one syllable words into questions. The simpler the question, the easier the answer is going to be for deciphering. So keep it simple. And granted, asking direct questions are a little bit is going to make you seem weird, but honestly, let's just be honest, you're weird anyway. Okay, you're an INTJ, and INTJs are kind of weird. So you're never going to get to 0% weirdness. I mean, that's irrational. Okay, we're going to talk about what's rational and irrational, thinking that the INTJ weirdness can be reduced to nothing. That's never going to happen. But you can allow yourself a little bit of weirdness and still have enough social skills to navigate a situation and still be totally accepted and liked and all that. So, allow for a little bit of weirdness with these questions. I mean, you don't want to go over the top, but at the same time, if you try to have zero weirdness, you're going to do things that are weird, and you're going to come across as more weird than you actually are. Okay, so you don't want to do that. But be direct with these questions, and it's okay to ask some MBTI questions a little bit. You don't want to go crazy, but I don't think one or two is so terrible. All right. So that's by direct. Secondly is, INTJs are good at making judgments and making this judgment, this is good, this is bad, this is right, this is wrong. Very good at that. And don't be afraid to do that in the social situation. I think what happens is INTJs get afraid that their judgment isn't going to work right. And often it doesn't, okay, because you're not coming in the right way. But that hesitation makes it worse. If you're coming in with the right frame, with the right sort of theoretical mind, I don't think there's anything wrong with making decisions, because you do that in the other stuff that you're being strategic about. So don't be afraid to make decisive choices about questions or about type. This person's an SJ, this person's not an SJ. And it's okay to be sort of, making decisions not based on what something is, but on what something isn't. We'll get to that. That's okay. But be decisive. SJ, not an SJ. SP, not an NF. Whatever it is. Don't be afraid to do that. Now, some bad things to do, and really there's just one, and that is, you're going to have to reel in the arrogance, okay? And that's connected to the paranoia, all right? So what's happened is you might make a mistake, or people might say, you're weird, or what are you talking about, or that's not me, whatever, something, and then you might get a little sort of anxiety ridden about anxiety and paranoid that they're sort of already thinking that you're a freak show, and then the arrogance gets kicked in where you sort of think or even say things like, well, if you weren't such a baboon, maybe you'd understand, that kind of stuff. You don't want to do that. You gotta reel that in, okay? Reel that in as much as you can, okay? And it's not just the arrogance, it's the paranoia and the feeling of alienation. You got to keep that under control. I think if you approach it strategically, you'll be able to do that. Okay, now, next. The next thing you have to do is you need to be, all right, obviously you're going to use deduction and induction, okay, deductive reasoning and inductive reasoning, but I want you to lean more on the deductive than the inductive, okay? So, for those who are not INTJs or NTs, deductive reasoning is when you make a specific prediction or conclusion from a general set of assumed knowledge. Okay, so you're going to deduce things. That's basically what that means. I think that is going to be helpful to you to deduce whether someone is an SJ or, again, the negative, not an SJ. Okay, I think that you can use that. All right. Now, obviously, going to use a little bit of induction of observing and making statements about what you observed, because you can't make a deduction about without observing things. But don't go too far into that, because I think one of the mistakes NTs make regarding typing is that they assume they're observing something they're not actually observing. Okay, so they think they're observing extroverted thinking when really that's not something that is actually observable at all. Okay, because it's a totally internal process. But they sort of think they're observing it, and then they sort of use, NTs use their rational thought to fill in the gap of something that they may or may not be observing. And so they attribute what they're observing to what they think rationally it should be, as opposed to what it actually is. And I think a lot of NT mistyping is because of that. From an inductive process that's observing something that's actually unobservable, but that can at best can only be observed indirectly, and they're attributing certain properties to it that they think they are observing, but it's really sort of rationalizing what that thing is. Okay. Now I realize if you're all the other types, you're like, what the fuck is he talking about? But the NTs are going to be like, okay, I don't agree with what you're saying, but I know what you're saying. You know what I mean? They're not going to be clueless as to what I just said. So the NTs, they understand me. You don't have to agree. I just want you to understand. All right. So lean more towards deductive. Next is, and this is something I do really use, okay, sometimes, and that is to think about what is the average behaviors. If we're doing a bell curve, a normal distribution curve of a type or a temperament, what are the average behaviors you can expect from a certain temperament or type, and then add into that probability. One of the mistakes people make in typing is that they're afraid to make some sort of mistake regarding that they sort of interpret as some sort of typism, racism thing going on, and so they always think in their mind, well, it could be an INTJ with a lot of empathy. That's not helpful, okay, because the average INTJ isn't going to be like that, okay, and it's not probable that they are the extreme outlier exception of INTJ. It's more likely they're an INFJ. Okay, that's more probable than they're this outlier. Outliers on the normal distribution curve, again, I'm speaking NT here. Outliers on the normal distribution curve are just that, outliers, extreme, irregular events. and they're not even, when you're doing statistical analysis, they're not even used. You don't even look at it. So that's important, that you want to avoid making those mistakes, meaning you want to avoid looking at outliers or worrying about the outliers when you're typing people. What you really should be looking for, what is the average? How does the average NF act? How can I expect that? Is it probable? Here's somebody that's, I'm thinking they're an NF, but they're acting in a really weird way. What is more probable? That they are this really, really weird sort of outside the normal distribution curve NF, or that they're not an NF, maybe they're an NT. Okay, that's, feel free to use that. If you use the mean average, and granted, there's no actual measurements here, I'm just saying, use what you know about the temperaments and types. I think if you do that, you'll be better off. Okay, so you're going to use deductive reasoning, and what are you going to be using to make those deductive choices, decisive choices, is probability and averages. Okay, how does the average SJ act? Okay, what can I expect in terms of behaviors and thought process on average? Okay, and then when I'm dealing with somebody, what is the probability that they are an SJ or not an SJ? If they're way off the scale, they're probably not an SJ. Okay, because again, how likely is it that you're dealing with something unusual off the curve? And is it, what's more likely? They're on a whole other they're on another curve. You know what I mean? It's like, again, am I dealing with an INTJ that's extremely empathic, or am I dealing with an INFJ? It's more likely you're dealing with an INFJ. And if you go heuristically that way, okay, and that's really what you're doing, you're using heuristics. But I'm talking NT pretty good here, huh? Not too bad. Better than I thought. So if you're going to be heuristic in your approach, you're more often than not are going to land in the right zone, okay? You're going to land in the right place, okay? And that's why you want to be deductive, and you want to stay away from sort of algorithms, okay? I'm sure those exist, but if you're just asking how to navigate it, you don't know, that's down the road, that's another tutorial, okay? If you think heuristically, just in terms of a generality and using averages and probability, you will land where you need to land regarding the temperaments and types. Okay, so that's the NT stuff. So now I'll try to get to the specifics without sounding NF-y, okay? And I'm going to try. I don't know that I'm going to succeed, but I am going to try. Okay. All right. So let's think about this. What are questions you can ask, whether they're intuitive or a sensor? Okay. Well, keep in mind it's very easy. Sensors are concrete, and intuitives are abstract. So asking a question, I find that if you ask a question about abstraction, it's something abstract, it's more likely you can find the split than asking something concrete. Because if you ask something concrete, both the intuitive and the sensor might give the same answer about it, liking it or whatever. Whereas if you ask something abstract, it's going to be a lot harder for the person who's the sensor. So that's going to be easier to figure out. So in other words, you want to ask a question that's from an intuitive point of view to both, rather than a sensing point of view to both, because you won't get the answer that you need in terms of which is which, in terms of them. So, it could be something like it could be something similar to what goes on in the actual MBTI. So, for example, one question is, would you rather teach a course or be in a course that teaches theories and ideas or specific facts and figures? That question, I find, really runs from intuitive to sensor. So far I haven't found that an intuitive answered it the other way, or a sensor has answered it the other way. So far, is in my experience, the sensors almost straight across the board answer facts and figures, and the intuitives theories and ideas. Okay, so a question like that's a pretty good question to ask. All right. Now, speaking of, because this just occurred to me while I was giving that answer, this is where you want to put probability and averages into asking and things like that. You can assume, let's assume you're in a random selection of people, okay? So it's a random selection, a party, or just a random place in the world, okay? So we can assume that the distribution is equal to, or more or less, the distribution of society in general. You're going to be encountering a lot more SJs than anything else, maybe up to 50%. It could be more depending on where you are, but certainly you can count on 50%. So assume that in general, you're probably going to run into an SJ out of 1 every 2 people, or if you want to be conservative, 1 out of every 3 people. in a random place. Okay, obviously, if you go to an astrophysics colloquium, I don't know if you're going to run into a lot of SJs. A few, but but let's assume it's a random distribution. You can expect a lot of SJs. Okay, no matter what, And then if you think about, you add the SPs. Certainly now we're talking about 2/3. So 2/3 of the population are sensors. So you can assume, it's okay, I think, on average, to assume that you're going to interact with a sensor and that you're dealing with a sensor more than you're dealing with an intuitive. Okay, that doesn't mean you're not dealing with an intuitive, but it's more likely than you are. So you should go in with that, and then if you ask the question about class, that'll nail it. That's a good one to ask. All right. So now another thing you should think about too is that you can always recognize your own kind. Okay, and this is true even outside of type. I always talk about this, and other people who are involved in this will also know, is that potheads know who the other potheads are. Okay, all potheads know who else is smoking pot. In a class, in a situation, wherever it is, there's not confusion. The non-potheads don't always know, but the potheads do. They can always spot each other, no matter what. And it doesn't have to be some kind of hippie way of being. It's just sort of, something. So you can spot your own kind. So you're going to be able to know other NTs right away. And that's simply by understanding what they're talking about in a way that you agree with. You can understand the way, like, for example, an STJ is talking about, but you may not agree. Okay, or you might understand what an NF is talking about, but you may not agree. So you'll trust yourself, and again, be decisive that when you're dealing with NTs. Okay, because I think that's going to be easiest for an INTJ or any of the NTs. I find that's true about me. To be honest, I know when I'm talking to an NF. I know quickly, immediately. Okay, I'm talking to an NF. NFs know that anyway. I mean, NFs gravitate towards each other no matter what. We just sort of know who's who and what's what in the NF energy fields. See, I'm getting into the metaphors again. The NF whatever brings us together, okay? We know who the other NFs are all the time, okay? So think about that. You can know your own. So between knowing your own kind and kind of making an understanding, or the leap that most of the time you're going to be dealing with sensors, even SJs, and then you have that question, you kind of got, now you can nail it down a little bit, or at least eliminate others. Well, I don't know if this is an NF or an NT, but I know they're not an SJ. You can do that. Again, you're going to use probability deduction. That's actually where you should start with this, I think. So there's that. Also, intuitives, if you're dealing with somebody who's obviously intuitive in terms of abstract ideas, you at least got it down that they're an NT or an NF. Okay, whether they're which one, that might take a little bit more, but you've got that down. Okay, you've got that down. All right, so what should you look for? I think honestly, two things. One is, I think dress matters. The way what you wear does make a difference in a way. It's not going to work 100% of the time, and that's why you want to be holistic. You want to throw all these things in simultaneously. You don't want to be too reductionary and look at one little thing to make a choice. You want to throw all these things together, and that will increase the probability of getting it right. But I think clothing matters to a certain degree. Don't think so much color, and don't think so much blandness. Okay, some people associate blandness with certain types and things like that. I wouldn't say that. So this is why I would look, because this is how I think about it sometimes. Let's take SJs. SJs usually wear things in a way that connects them to whatever group they belong to. Okay, and how important that is to them. All right. So it has a very it's very much uniform like. Okay, even if it's just nice clothes, whatever, but they're going to wear the clothes that are appropriate for whatever group they belong to, wherever it is. Okay, they're not going to be out of sync with the location, the group, the job, ever. They're not going to be out of sync. So, for example, where I work, we have nursing program, we have various medical tech programs or whatever, and they're expected to wear that nurse outfit. Okay, now honestly, they don't have to wear that nurse outfit all day long, because they might not have class till much later. There's a lot of things you could do, but they will wear that nurse outfit all day long, because that's their job and that's what they're doing, and they're in that role. They're taking on that role for society. It's very important. You need nurses, you need medical technicians, you need phlebotomists, whatever. You need that, so they dress like that. So when I see someone dressed like a nurse coming into class, automatically I kind of think, okay, we probably got an SJ here. All right, and then I've actually never been wrong about that, later on, but immediately, SJ. Nursing is very SJ. That profession is very SJ too. So if somebody dresses like that, I know we're dealing with an SJ. So clothing matters. All right. SPs wear sort of, they splash. They want to make a splash. It doesn't mean it's crazy or inappropriate, but it could be bright colors or strong colors. Okay, they want to make a certain splash on the scene. All right. And sometimes it's rebellious colors and rebellious ways of dressing. What is the way I shouldn't dress? That's the way I'm dressing. That kind of goes on. NFs is very individualistic. Okay, it's a style of individual expression. It's not necessarily. People think it's all colors and flashy and hippie. Not necessarily. It is sort of expressive of a specific style and identity that's coming out. Like even today. This is my professor wear. That I put on my teaching clothes. And yeah, sometimes I teach with a hoodie. Nothing's more NF than that. Teaching with a hoodie. And and look, it's Providence College. It's that's what this is. So it's that's part of my identity. I'm projecting it right now. And NTs, I find it's for utility. They may dress for their job or whatever, but it's not about wanting to wear the right uniform for the team, the group. It has to do with a certain utility. And if the utility wasn't present, if the utility wasn't necessary, they wouldn't necessarily dress like that. They would dress in a way that has utility, that's not uniform. That's something to look for. Because there's sort of this idea that NTs all wear like black and gray and things like that, and that's kind of true sometimes with even INTJs, but it's not necessarily correct. But that's something you want to look for. Let's see, what else? I guess the last thing is about language. And, language, it takes a little while to hear it, but, language, NF language, again, is metaphor and emotional and, hyperbole, we're in that. NT language is very tech and utility. And more jargon, I shouldn't say tech, but jargon, NTs love jargon, SJ, it's very sort of, appropriate language for the situation based on rank, job, that kind of thing. And SP, it's very sort of a rebellion of language sometimes, or whatever it is, So I think that's the best I can do right now for helping. I tried to take out, now granted there's a whole bunch of other things I do, but I can't explain them in a way that is useful, okay? Like taking in a person. I can't explain what that means. To take someone in. People with introverted thinking will think, well, I understand what that is, and I speak on behalf of ENFPs and INFPs, and like, no, it's something else. It's really, really something else to take them in, like really take them in, okay? It happens, So I can't explain that exactly, so there is some sort of gap here. But I think the information I gave will at least start you off for the INTJs. That's what I think. I'm trying to give you a launch pad. And then hopefully from the launch pad you can go forward. So, all right, so that's it. Nice and long. Perfect for the INTJs, not everybody else. But all right, so tell me what you think. Can't wait.